Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. It's good to be with you. Thanks for joining us. President Biden is joining the leaders of Australia and the United Kingdom to announce a new joint defense partnership. As part of the agreement, the countries will deploy nuclear-powered submarines to counter Chinese aggression in the Indo-Pacific.
This initiative is about making sure that each of us has a modern capability, the most modern capabilities we need to maneuver and defend against rapidly evolving threats. AUKUS will bring together our sailors, our scientists, and our industries to maintain and expand our edge in military capabilities and critical technologies such as cyber, artificial intelligence, quantum technologies, and undersea domains.
The announcement came after the president met with business leaders. The administration is seeking help from employers to get more Americans vaccinated. Last week, Mr. Biden announced a vaccine or testing mandate for all companies with more than 100 employees. New polling shows increasing support for vaccine and masking measures, up more than 10 points in 2 months. Until recent weeks, President Biden had consistently received high marks for his pandemic response. However, the administration is facing increasing criticism from Republicans after the mandate. The pandemic factored heavily into efforts to recall California's Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom. That push failed last night. More than 60% of voters opted to reject the recall and keep Newsom in office. Plus, a new book from veteran journalist Bob Woodward reports President Biden overruled his top advisor's attempts to extend the U.S. military presence in Afghanistan. It comes as the White House is defending Joint Chiefs of Staff Chair General Mark Milley. The same book claims he was concerned former President Trump would spark a war with China in the final months of his presidency. Woodward reports Milley reassured his Chinese counterpart in secret calls, saying the U.S. would not stage an attack despite increasingly hostile rhetoric from the former president.
I'm not going to add more or speak to anonymous, unconfirmed reports about conversations with limited context from here. But what I can assure you all of is that the president knows General Milley. He has been chairman of the Joint Chiefs for almost 8 months of his presidency. They've worked side by side through a range of international events. And the president has complete confidence in his leadership, his patriotism, and his fidelity to our Constitution.
For more, let's bring in Nikole Killion, Meridith McGraw, and Andrew Solender. Nikole is a CBS News congressional correspondent. Meridith is a national political correspondent for Politico. And Andrew is a senior reporter at Forbes. Welcome to you all. A lot of news to get to today. Meridith, let me start with you. President Biden is announcing a new joint initiative between the U.S., the U.K., and Australia to counter China. Describe for us how exactly that is going to work and what is going to be the focus specifically?
Well, a new joint statement just right before we came on was put out by leaders of Australia, the UK, and the US, and they said they're guided by their enduring ideals. And this is really about deepening diplomatic, security, and defense cooperation in the Indo-Pacific region. Now, the US and the UK have, of course, long had a partnership. And bringing in Australia comes as we've really seen a lot of aggression from China in the Indo-Pacific region and the Pacific, specifically regarding who has ownership of certain maritime territories. And this, the goal of this is really to strengthen that partnership as China is ramping up its own nuclear technologies. They have, nuclear missiles, and this partnership is aimed at sharing intelligence and then making sure that that region is really locked down in terms of surveillance and our own naval capabilities with our allies.
Right. We know there's been a great deal of concern at the Pentagon and U.S. officials looking at China's military buildup in that region. So it'll be something to watch moving forward here. Well, Andrew, President Biden is facing stiff resistance from some quarters after calling for more aggressive vaccination measures. What happened at today's meeting with business leaders discussing that?
Right, so Biden, he's clearly trying to shift the focus away from the Republican criticism that this, takes away liberty from people to highlight the success stories that people have had in mandating the vaccines. So he brought in business leaders who have done it before, and he highlighted in his remarks before the roundtable examples like a university whose vaccine rate rose by double digits after they mandated the vaccine. And he also pointed to public opinion data that shows that a majority of Americans really do support the individual tenets of this plan, which includes an OSHA regulation to require employers with more than 100 employees to implement vaccine or test mandates, requiring health insurance providers that participate in Medicare and Medicaid to institute a vaccine mandate, and requiring federal workers and federal contractors to take the vaccine with no testing option. Republicans have pushed back very hard. You have the Arizona Attorney General filing a lawsuit to challenge the OSHA regulation, arguing that it violates the Equal Protection Clause. By the same vein, conservatives are seizing on a comment by Jen Psaki today that migrants are not subject to a vaccine mandate, to argue that there's unequal enforcement of this vaccine. But what Biden is really trying to do is say this vaccine mandate has a clear public health purpose, and it works. It forces people to make a clear decision about whether to take the vaccine, and it raises rates.
Yeah, and we're seeing public opinion on this evolve here over time. Nikole, switching gears, some of the world's top gymnasts testified about how the FBI has handled their sexual abuse allegations against former Olympic team Dr. Larry Nassar. How did this hearing come about?
Well, look, this has been about 6 years in the making from the time that some of the initial complaints were registered against Larry Nassar back in 2015. But the FBI, in essence, bungled the response and waited almost a year before launching a formal investigation. And so that delay, those missteps, all of which were uncovered recently in a new Inspector General report from the Justice Department, is really, in essence, what spurred this hearing, because lawmakers wanted to get to the bottom of these lapses, why the FBI didn't properly investigate these claims of abuses that involved not only these world-class gymnasts, but hundreds of athletes. And so obviously it did result a couple of years back in the conviction of Larry Nassar, who was a team doctor for USA Gymnastics, which is where a lot of these complaints were lodged and alleged. But, look, this was a very emotional hearing today in this room. You had all 4 gymnasts from Simone Biles to Michaela Maroney, Maggie Nichols, a collegiate gymnast, as well as Allie Reisman. I mean, these are all stars we're talking about, and yet they very tearfully and painstakingly described the abuse that they suffered, not only once in terms of, what they endured at the hands of Larry Nassar, but also the abuse, in essence, from the FBI by, in their opinion, not taking their cases seriously and letting this sit for months upon end, and even just in the way that they were questioned and how their cases were handled. The toll is very real for all of them. One thing that was extremely striking was Allie Reisman talked about how she would train for 7 hours, for the Olympics and these high-level competitions, and there are some days where she can't even stand up in the shower, where she can't even, manage to take a 10-minute walk. It's that difficult for her, going through this experience over the last couple of years. So, in essence, they are demanding accountability, not only from the FBI, but also from a lot of these agencies and entities that oversee the sport. And so, Congress is now tasked with also, trying to find reforms going forward to address their concerns.
Such powerful testimony from these brave young women. Nikole Killion, thank you so much, Nikole. I know you have to get going. We really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us.
You bet.
So, Meredith, let me turn to you. What did FBI Director Wray have to say about the allegations?
Well, it really was remarkable in that gut-wrenching testimony that we saw earlier today that the FBI Director, Chris Wray, actually apologized for how the FBI handled these investigations. And we learned that an agent was, in fact, fired for how these investigations were conducted. But, for a lot of people who have followed this case, for the victims, of course, they say that it just falls short of justice for them. They want to see prosecutions in this case. And, as you just talked about, the DOJ Inspector General released a report that found that these FBI agents made false statements and they failed to respond to tips. And these elite athletes, these gems of the gymnastics community, they talked about how they raised concerns. They, talked about the abuse that they endured. And yet it took months up to years for their complaints to be followed up on. So it is notable that an FBI agent was fired, but there is going to be a debate over how this case is prosecuted. There's going to be questions about whether or not this is something that the FBI needs to handle at the national level or in the local jurisdiction there at the FBI office in Indianapolis. But for these athletes, for their fans, for the people who've listened to their harrowing tales here, I think there is just strong demands for justice to be served.
Absolutely. Andrew, veteran journalist Bob Woodward's latest book detailing Joint Chiefs Chair General Mark Milley supposedly working around former President Trump also alleges divisions within the Biden administration on Afghanistan. What are the claims?
That's right. So, the primary things that have come out of the book excerpts that were reported so far is that Milley made a call to his Chinese counterpart, basically telling him, the United States is not planning to attack China, and if they will, the U.S. will give advance warning. At the same time, he had conversations with several administration officials, as well as House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, expressing belief that Trump was essentially mentally unstable in the aftermath of the January 6th attack, and informing senior military officials in the nuclear chain of command that they have to follow the procedure, which includes him if ordered to launch a nuclear strike. And as you said, the book excerpts that have been reported also detail that both Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin both advised President Biden in the run-up to the U.S. withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan to possibly take a more extended route to doing that, with Blinken suggesting it could last longer, and Austin proposing a sort of a closed-off withdrawal. And Biden, really did not favor those. He felt that the U.S. mission was not to knock out the Taliban; it was to take out Al-Qaeda, and that the U.S. really wasn't serving a purpose, which backs up his public statements on the matter. And this intermixes quite potently with some of the rhetoric you've heard on the Hill recently. Senators in both parties yesterday really grilling Blinken on the U.S. withdrawal. Some Republicans really going in hard. And as Fox News is reporting, General Miller briefed senators as well and told them that he disagreed as well with Biden's decision to withdraw U.S. troops when he did. And on the Miller news, you have roughly a dozen House and Senate Republicans as of this afternoon calling for Milley to resign or be fired if the reporting is true. And you have the White House and the Joint Chiefs pushing back, saying his actions were well within his role and responsibility as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. And you had Jen Psaki and Biden recently saying that Biden has confidence in Milley to continue to do his job.
likely, though, those questions are going to continue to be raised here about, the role, particularly when you're talking about somebody who is reporting to the commander-in-chief. Meridith McGraw and Andrew Solender, thank you so much.